You know that feeling. And when your diet just feels like it's on autopilot, maybe, and your health goals, they just seem kind of out of reach.
Mm.
You feel like you're trying, but the cravings are still there, and maybe you just feel generally unwell.
Yeah, that sense of frustration is really common.
Right. So today, we're diving into something that really speaks to that.
Oh, yeah.
Metabolic sovereignty.
Which sounds fancy, but it's basically your fundamental right, your ability to actually be in control of your body's metabolism.
Exactly. And we're going to uncover, well, a major culprit that seems to be hijacking that control. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs.
And it's so important to get this. We're not just talking about, obvious junk food here.
No.
UPFs are. It's a much bigger, sometimes more subtle category. The real issue is how they're made and how they fundamentally mess with our bodies.
Totally. So to really get our heads around this, we probably need to talk about the Noviate classification system.
Right. It's basically a way to sort foods based on how much industrial processing they've gone through.
Okay, so there are 4 groups.
4 groups, yeah. Group 1 is your unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Think fruits, veggies, grains, meat, fish, eggs, the basics.
Got it. Simple stuff.
Group 2 is what they call processed culinary ingredients. So oils, sugar, salt, things we cook with but don't usually eat on their own.
Okay, makes sense.
Then group 3 is processed foods. This is where you start combining group 1 and 2, like canned vegetables, simple cheese, fresh bread from a bakery.
Right. Still pretty recognizable foods.
Exactly. But our main focus today, where we're really digging in, is group 4, ultra-processed foods.
Okay. Group 4. So what's the big deal? Why zero in on this group?
Well, our mission today is really to break down what these UPFs actually are and, why are they everywhere? Why are they so appealing?
Yeah, why do we crave them so much?
Right. And crucially, how do they impact your health? We're talking about how they disrupt your body's own, internal control systems at a really fundamental level.
And we've pulled together a lot of research for this, haven't we? Looking at, food processing itself, metabolic health science, how food interacts with our biology.
Yeah, a real deep dive into the sources.
Okay, let's unpack it then. What exactly makes something an ultra-processed food? How does Novier define group 4?
So like we said, group 1 is food pretty much as it comes from nature. An apple, brown rice, a chicken breast. Minimal fuss.
Right. Washed, maybe chopped.
Group 2, the cooking ingredients. Olive oil from olives, sugar from cane, salt from the sea. You use them, you don't eat them straight.
Got it. And group 3 is combining those, like canned tomatoes, group 1 tomatoes, group 2 salt.
Exactly. Or simple cheese, just milk, salt, cultures, or that plain loaf of bread. Still fairly straightforward combinations.
Okay. So now, group 4, ultra-processed. What changes?
This is where it shifts dramatically. These aren't just foods that have been modified a bit. They're described as industrial formulations.
Industrial formulations. What does that mean practically?
Practically, it usually means 5 or more ingredients. And often, ingredients you just wouldn't have in your kitchen cupboard.
Like what?
Things like hydrolyzed proteins, protein isolates, modified oils, maltodextrin, high fructose corn syrup. Stuff that sounds more like it came from a chemical plant than a farm.
Yeah, definitely not in my pantry. So it's the type of ingredients, too.
It is. And it's also about the cosmetic additives.
Cosmetic, you mean like colors and flavors?
Exactly. Artificial flavors to make them irresistible, colors to make them look, emulsifiers for texture, sweeteners. It's all about creating this intense sensory experience.
Engineered food, basically.
That's a really good way to put it. And the manufacturing processes themselves are different, too, unique to UPFs.
How so?
Things like extrusion, that's how lots of cereals and snacks get their shape, or molding. Pre-frying is common, too. These aren't your traditional home cooking methods.
Okay, I see. So it changes the food structure itself.
That's the idea. These industrial processes can alter the food matrix in ways our bodies might not be, fully equipped to handle easily.
So just to be clear then, the Novier system isn't really about nutrients like fat or sugar content per se.
Not primarily, no. It's focused on the degree and the purpose of the processing. How heavily manufactured is it? What kinds of industrial ingredients are used? That's the key distinction for Group 4.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense. It's the industrial nature of it. So why are these things so incredibly appealing then?
Yeah.
So hard to resist.
Yeah, the craveability factor. This is where it gets really fascinating and maybe a bit disturbing.
Let me guess. It's not an accident.
Not at all. Let's talk about the bliss point.
The bliss point, I've heard of that. Sounds blissful.
Huh. Well, it's engineered to be. It's basically the scientifically calculated combination of sugar, fat, and salt that makes a food maximally palatable.
Maximally palatable, meaning it hits your brain's reward center just right.
Exactly. It triggers dopamine release, makes you feel good, makes you want more. These foods are meticulously designed for that effect. It's not random deliciousness, it's engineered deliciousness.
And those three things, sugar, fat, salt,
Yeah.
they each play a specific role.
They do. Sugar is a huge dopamine trigger, like you said. It creates that pleasure association, makes you want it again. They fine-tune the sweetness, not too much, not too little, just right for that bliss point.
And fat, what's its job?
Fat is largely about mouthfeel, that richness, that creaminess. It's incredibly satisfying, especially when combined with sugar. Think ice cream, chocolate bars.
Texture?
Yeah. And salt's a powerhouse. It enhances all the other flavors, adds that savory kick. It can also stimulate appetite, interestingly.
Stimulate appetite, wow.
And it can even mask some off flavors that might come from the industrial ingredients or the processing itself. So flavor booster and maybe a bit of disguise.
So it's this perfect trio, engineered to bypass our natural controls and just keep us eating. It feels like hacking our brain chemistry.
That's a pretty accurate description. Food companies spend enormous amounts of money on R&D, research and development, to nail these ratios.
Really? Like actual testing?
Oh, yeah. Massive taste testing panels, refining formulations over and over. You mentioned cherry vanilla Dr. Pepper earlier. The story goes they tested something like 61 different versions on thousands of people to get that bliss point just right.
61 versions. That's intense.
It shows you how deliberate it is.
So this engineering creates this, what did you call it? Flavor overload.
Yeah, it bombards the senses. And our brains, they evolved to seek out sugar, fat, and salt because in nature, those usually meant energy-rich, valuable food.
Right, like ripe fruit or fatty meat. Survival stuff.
Exactly. But UPFs deliver these tastes in such concentrated, unnatural combinations that they just overwhelm those ancient reward pathways. It's like our survival instincts are being exploited.
And does that constant stimulation, change things long term?
It seems it can. It might dull our sensitivity to more subtle, natural flavors. Whole foods might start tasting bland in comparison. So yeah, it can actually shift our whole relationship with food.
Wow. Okay. And it's not just taste, right? You mentioned something, vanishing caloric density. What's that about?
Ah, yeah, that's another clever aspect, especially with things like puff snacks. Cheese puffs, for example.
Melt in your mouth.
Right. It disappears so quickly. The theory is that this rapid vanishing tricks your brain. It doesn't fully register the calories you're taking in because the food is gone before your fullness signals really kick in.
So you eat more without feeling full.
Pretty much. You can eat a whole bag and not feel nearly as satisfied as you would from the same calories in, say, nuts or an apple. It's like eating flavored air, calorie-wise.
Sneaky. Okay, so we've got the bliss point, vanishing calories, and then there's just the fact that this stuff is everywhere.
Absolutely. The marketing is relentless, often targeting kids. And UPFs are often cheaper and more accessible, especially in areas where fresh food options are limited food deserts.
It creates this environment, right, where the easy choice is often the ultra-processed one.
Exactly. It's often called an obesogenic environment, one that promotes obesity. And these foods are brilliant at disrupting our satiety signals, that feeling of fullness.
How so?
They essentially decouple pleasure from nutrition. You get that big reward hit, but it doesn't satisfy your body's actual need for nutrients or trigger fullness in the same way whole foods do. So your natural feedback loop gets overridden.
And I remember reading something about these preferences maybe being set in childhood. That sounds worrying.
It's a definite concern. If kids are constantly exposed to these hyperpalatable foods early on, it could shape their taste preferences for life, making it harder to appreciate whole foods later. It suggests a long-term impact we need to consider.
Okay, so UPFs are engineered for craving. They trick our fullness signals. It's quite a setup. But what actually happens inside our bodies when we eat them regularly? What's the physiological impact?
Right, let's get into the physiological onslaught, as you put it. Blood sugar is a big one.
Yeah, the sugar spikes and crashes.
Exactly. Many UPFs are packed with refined carbs and added sugars, high glycemic index. So they digest super fast, flood your bloodstream with glucose. Big spike.
And then the crash.
Then the crash. Your body releases a load of insulin to deal with the sugar, often overshoots, and your blood sugar plummets, leaving you tired, cranky, and craving.
More sugary stuff. Vicious cycle.
Precisely. And that roller coaster, repeated over and over, is incredibly taxing.
And that leads to insulin resistance, doesn't it?
It's a major driver. Your cells start to become numb, less responsive to insulin's signal to take up glucose. Your pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin to get the job done.
Working overtime.
Constantly. And that persistent insulin resistance is a huge step towards prediabetes and eventually type 2 diabetes. It's like the body's communication system is breaking down.
Okay, so blood sugar's a mess. Does it affect other hormones too? It feels like it would be broader than just insulin.
It definitely can be. Take PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, for example. That often involves underlying insulin resistance. So eating UPS, high in refined carbs and sugar, can make that insulin resistance worse. And higher insulin levels can then stimulate the ovaries to produce more androgens, which worsens the PCOS symptoms.
I see. So it exacerbates existing conditions.
It can. And there's also research linking higher UPF intake to worse menopausal symptoms, again, likely tied to hormonal shifts and inflammation. Some researchers even talk about UPFs acting as potential endocrine disruptors.
Endocrine disruptors. So messing with our hormone system generally.
That's the implication, interfering with the delicate balance of our hormonal signaling network. It's an area of ongoing research, but definitely concerning.
It is unsettling. And we know UPFs are strongly linked to weight gain, obesity, metabolic syndrome.
Yeah.
What's the mechanism there?
Several things converge. First, they're usually very energy dense, lots of calories packed into a small volume.
Easy to overeat.
Very easy. They're often high in unhealthy fats, refined sugars, salt, but low in fiber, protein, micronutrients, the stuff that actually helps you feel full and provides value.
So lots of calories, not much satisfaction.
Exactly. That combination makes it simple to consume excess calories, leading to weight gain, especially that dangerous visceral fat around the organs.
And inflammation, you mentioned that.
Yes, the chronic low-grade inflammation that UPFs seem to promote is a key factor in metabolic syndrome. That cluster of issues like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, abnormal cholesterol, and abdominal fat that dramatically increases heart disease and diabetes risk. It's a systemic problem.
Okay. And what about fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD? I feel like we hear more about that now.
We do, and UPFs are seen as a major driver of the rise in NAFLD, which some are now calling MASLD, metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease.
How do UPFs contribute?
Multiple ways. High fructose corn syrup, common in sodas and processed foods, gets metabolized mainly in the liver. This process can directly lead to the liver making and storing more fat de novo lipogenesis.
Making new fat in the liver.
Yeah.
Not good.
It's not good. Plus, the high refined carbs and low fiber combo drives insulin resistance, which also encourages fat storage in the liver, and liquid calories from sugary drinks. They bypass satiety signals, making it easy to overload the liver.
And they lack nutrients the liver needs.
Often, yes. They displace nutrient-dense foods that support liver health, so it's like a multi-pronged attack on the liver.
Wow. Okay, so liver damage too. Are there other major chronic diseases linked to UPFs? The list seems long.
It is, unfortunately, long and growing. Consistent research links high UPF consumption to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, as we discussed, certain cancers, particularly colorectal and ovarian depression, and even a higher risk of dying early from any cause.
All-cause mortality at the start.
It really highlights that these aren't isolated effects. UPFs impact fundamental systems throughout the body.
And that theme of chronic low-grade inflammation keeps coming up. It seems central.
It really does seem to be a core mechanism. UPFs contain components that actively promote inflammation, but they also disrupt the gut microbiome, which is itself a key regulator of systemic inflammation.
How do they disrupt the gut?
Well, certain additives, particularly emulsifiers, things like carboxymethylcellulose or polysorbate 80, used for texture, have been shown to damage the protective mucus layer in the gut.
Making it leaky.
Exactly. That leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability allows bacterial components like endotoxins to slip into the bloodstream where they don't belong. And that triggers a body-wide inflammatory response. It's like your immune system's alarm is constantly going on.
So it's a double hit. UPFs bring in inflammatory stuff, and they damage the gut barrier, allowing more inflammatory triggers through.
That's a great way to summarize it. And at the same time, they displace whole foods that are packed with anti-inflammatory compounds and fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria.
The double burden, you called it.
The double burden. Pro-inflammatory components coming in, anti-inflammatory, protective components being pushed out. It really undermines the body's ability to stay healthy.
Okay, this is real. But you mentioned something even deeper before. UPFs acting as enzyme disruptors. That sounds fundamental.
It potentially is. This goes beyond just the macros or general inflammation. We're talking about specific components in UPFs, let's call them metabolic toxins, for simplicity that might directly interfere with the enzymes that run our metabolism.
Metabolic toxins, like what kind of components?
Could be specific ingredients like excess fructose, maybe certain types of amino acids if they're out of balance, artificial sweeteners, but also the additives, emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial colors, flavorings, even contaminants from packaging or processing.
These things could actually gum up the works of our metabolic machinery.
That's the concern, yes.
Yeah.
They might cause problems in several ways. For example, interfering with mitochondrial function, the energy factories in our cells. They could ramp up that de novo lipogenesis, the fat production in the liver we talked about. They might alter insulin signaling directly, change the gut microbiome in ways that affect enzyme activity, even impact how fat cells themselves function. It's complex.
You singled out fructose earlier. How does that specifically mess with enzymes?
High doses of fructose, like from high fructose corn syrup, seem to directly inhibit certain key enzymes inside the mitochondria that are essential for making energy, ATP.
Which enzymes?
Enzymes like AMPK, which is like a master energy sensor for the cell, and others involved in burning fat for fuel, like CPT1 and LCAD. By blocking these, fructose basically makes our energy production less efficient.
And that contributes to insulin resistance.
Yes, mitochondrial dysfunction is strongly linked to insulin resistance. If your cells can't produce energy efficiently, it throws everything off balance. It's like putting sludge in your engine.
Okay, that makes sense. Cellular inefficiency leads to bigger problems. What about all those additives, emulsifiers, preservatives? Do they directly block digestive enzymes, for example?
That's a really interesting question. The current research maybe doesn't show strong direct inhibition of major digestive enzymes like amylase or lipase by most common food additives in the way some drugs might work. However, but we know that food components can affect enzyme activity. Think about polyphenols in plants. They can inhibit some digestive enzymes. So the highly artificial nature of UPF ingredients plus the intense processing, it definitely raises questions. Could they subtly interfere with digestion, maybe leading to incomplete breakdown or gut issues, even without outright blocking the enzymes? It's plausible.
So maybe not a sledgehammer, but potentially throwing some sand in the gears.
That's a good analogy. And let's look at specific additives, emulsifiers like CMC and polysorbate 80. We know they're not great for the gut lining.
Right, eroding the mucus layer, increasing permeability. The leaky gut again.
Exactly. And while they might not directly block, say, metabolic enzymes in the liver, damaging the gut environment can absolutely affect enzymes that live in the gut or rely on a healthy gut barrier.
Like DAO, the histamine degrading enzyme.
Precisely. DAO is primarily located in the gut lining. If that lining is damaged or inflamed by emulsifiers or other UPF components, DAO production or activity could definitely be impaired. That's a key potential link to histamine intolerance issues.
Okay, that's a huge connection. Yeah. What about artificial sweeteners? Often pitched as harmless or even helpful?
Yeah, but they're not metabolically inert despite having no calories.
Right.
Some can trigger insulin release, weirdly enough.
Even without sugar.
Seems so. And they can significantly alter the gut microbiota. Those changes in bacteria have been linked, in some studies, to glucose intolerance, the opposite of what you'd want. There's also research connecting them to oxidative stress and even neuroinflammation.
Brain inflammation. Wow.
Again, maybe not direct enzyme inhibition in the classic sense for something like DAO, but their broader disruption of gut health and glucose metabolism suggests they're definitely interfering with metabolic processes, which could indirectly impact various enzyme functions.
And other stuff. Preservatives, packaging chemicals.
Many preservatives, some antioxidants used in processing, and chemicals like BPA from packaging are flagged as potential obesogens or endocrine disruptors.
Obesogens, meaning they promote obesity?
Potentially, yes. And endocrine disruptors interfere with hormones, which control countless enzymatic reactions. Obesogens might promote fat cell formation, another enzyme-driven process, add fructose driving liver fat production. It's a lot for the body to handle.
Overwhelming the system.
It could certainly burden detoxification systems like the cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver, which are crucial for clearing toxins. If they're constantly busy dealing with UPF components, maybe they have less capacity for other jobs.
So it really is this complex soup of ingredients in UPFs, potentially interfering with our metabolism at this very basic enzymatic level, way beyond just calories.
Exactly. It's not just empty calories. It could be active biochemical interference. Which brings us right back to that idea of losing control, the collapse of metabolic sovereignty.
Yeah. And one aspect of that loss of control must be metabolic inflexibility, right?
Yeah.
Where your body struggles to switch fuel sources.
Absolutely. Metabolic flexibility, easily switching between burning carbs and burning fat, is key to metabolic health. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, they're often marked by inflexibility.
And UPFs contribute to that.
Definitely. That constant flood of easy glucose from refined carbs, the inflammation, the insulin resistance, it all makes it harder for your body to tap into and burn stored fat. It gets stuck in sugar burning mode, like a car stuck in first gear.
Okay. And then there's the addiction angle. We touched on the bliss point engineering. It sounds genuinely addictive.
The potential is certainly there. That intense hit of sugar, fat, and salt activates the same brain reward pathways, dopamine, opioid receptors, as addictive substances.
Really? Same pathways?
Similar pathways, yes. This can lead to behaviors that look a lot like addiction. Compulsive eating, intense cravings you can't ignore, maybe even withdrawal-like symptoms if you try to stop.
Like feeling irritable or getting headaches?
Things like that, yeah. Failed attempts to cut back. The speed of nutrient delivery from these refined foods seems to enhance this effect, too. When food choices are driven by that intense reward signal, not by actual hunger or nutritional need, you've lost control.
And it's not just happening in a vacuum. The whole food environment pushes these things on us.
That's such a critical piece. The nonstop marketing, the lower price point, often thanks to subsidies, the sheer convenience, the long shelf life. UPFs have squeezed out whole foods in a big way.
What kind of percentage are we talking?
In countries like the US, UK, Canada, UPFs can make up 50% or even more of daily calories consumed. It's staggering.
Half our diet.
Or more. And it's often higher in lower socioeconomic groups, partly due to food deserts and targeted marketing. This massive dietary shift fuels the chronic disease epidemic. Plus, we haven't even talked much about the potentially harmful chemicals in the food from additives or processing.
It really is a perfect storm. The body's processes are impaired. There's this psychological pull, maybe addiction, and society makes them the easy option. That equals loss of control.
That sums it up perfectly. Even the convenience becomes a trap. People cook less, lose skills, lose connection to real food, become more reliant on these packaged goods. And like you said, the disproportionate impact on disadvantaged groups makes it a real social justice issue, too. The system is kind of set up against metabolic sovereignty for many people.
Okay, wow. It's a bleak picture, but understanding it is key.
Yeah.
Now, let's try to connect this back to some of our previous deep dives. How does this UPF story link to, say, the microbiome and mental health?
Oh, huge connections there. We talked in that deep dive about how vital the gut microbiome is for everything, including mental well-being. UPFs are like a wrecking ball for the microbiome.
How so, specifically?
They promote dysbiosis, that imbalance. You get less diversity, fewer beneficial bugs like Akkermansia or Faecalibacterium, which are really important. And at the same time, you often get an overgrowth of less desirable pro-inflammatory microbes. It shifts the whole ecosystem the wrong way.
And the leaky gut connection again, damaging the barrier.
Yes. Those emulsifiers, maybe trans fats, they compromise the gut lining. More permeability. And we know the gut and brain are constantly talking the gut-brain axis.
Right.
So gut inflammation and dysbiosis translate to problems upstairs. It can affect mood, cognition. The lack of beneficial bacteria means fewer beneficial compounds like short-chain fatty acids are produced, which the brain needs. And the systemic inflammation triggered by leaky gut can contribute to neuroinflammation. Even artificial sweeteners have been linked to brain inflammation and oxidative stress.
So UPFs hit mental health via the gut.
Okay.
What about histamines? Our deep dive on histamine intolerance, DAO, all that.
Another really important connection. Remember, histamine intolerance is often about an imbalance, too much histamine coming in, or not enough DAO enzyme to break it down. UPFs can worsen both sides of that equation.
How?
Well, the gut damage from emulsifiers and inflammation directly impacts the gut lining where most DAO is made and works. So less DAO functions.
Terra's breakdown.
Right. Then the dysbiosis they cause can lead to an overgrowth of bacteria that actually produce histamine in your gut. So more histamine being made internally.
Increasing the load.
Exactly. Plus, the leaky gut allows more histamine from food or from gut bacteria to get absorbed into your system. And the general inflammation UPFs cause can make mast cells release more histamine, so it's increasing the histamine load and impairing the breakdown. A perfect storm for histamine issues.
Wow. It's like they're hitting the gas and cutting the brakes on histamine at the same time.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Okay, one more connection.
Yeah.
What about the fiber fallacy episode? How do UPFs relate there?
Ah, yes, the fiber paradox. The more UPFs people eat, generally, the less fiber they get overall, because UPFs are usually made from refined ingredients stripped of their natural fiber.
Right, displacing whole foods.
Exactly. And it's crucial to distinguish between fiber from whole foods, which comes in a complex package with different fiber types, nutrients, phytochemicals, and the isolated or added fibers often put into UPFs to make health claims.
Like inulin or polydextrose added to a cereal bar.
Precisely. Those single added fibers might not provide the same range of benefits as the complex fiber matrix in whole foods. They might just be one tool, not the whole toolbox.
And we talked about how some people struggle to tolerate fiber. Do UPFs play into that?
They very likely do. Remember the enzyme disruption and gut damage we discussed? That can impair your ability to digest and ferment fiber properly.
Ow.
If your microbiome is already damaged by UPFs, it might lack the specific bacteria needed to handle certain fibers. An inflamed gut lining might also react badly to the physical presence of fiber. So what feels like fiber intolerance could actually be a symptom of a gut compromised by UPFs.
So the UPFs damage the system, making it unable to handle the good stuff like fiber.
That's a key part of the cycle. UPFs are low in the diverse fibers needed to build a resilient, fiber-loving microbiome in the first place, so they create the problem, then make it harder to tolerate the solution.
It really does all weave together. UPFs seem like this common enemy across all these different health areas: microbiome, histamine, fiber tolerance, with enzyme disruption and gut damage as key links.
That's a great summary. They really are a common antagonist. So the big question becomes, how do we fight back? How do we start reclaiming our metabolic sovereignty?
Okay, yeah. Actionable steps. First step has to be just recognizing them, right? And cutting back.
Absolutely. Become an ingredient list detective. Look for those long lists, unfamiliar chemical-sounding names, lots of additives. That's your clue.
Red flags.
Big red flag. And remember, it doesn't have to be all or nothing overnight. Gradual reduction is usually more sustainable. Swap one UPF snack for fruit, maybe. Small steps.
And the flip side of reducing UPFs is eating more real food,
Oh,
cooking more.
that's the foundation. Prioritizing home cooking with whole or minimally processed ingredients. No VA Group 1 and simple Group 3 things. When you cook from scratch, you are in control.
You know exactly what's going in.
Exactly. Plus, those whole foods are packed with the nutrients and fiber your body and your microbiome actually need to thrive. It's genuinely empowering, an act of reclaiming control.
Okay. What about other lifestyle things? Exercise, specific diets.
Regular physical activity is always crucial for metabolic health, no doubt about that. And dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet, which emphasizes whole foods, healthy fats, plants, that's a great framework.
And if someone has specific issues like histamine intolerance or trouble with fiber.
That's where working with a knowledgeable healthcare practitioner comes in for personalized advice. But even then, reducing the UPF load is almost always step one. It helps heal the gut, reduce inflammation, and can often improve tolerance to things like fiber and histamine over time. You need to remove the main offender first.
Right. Address the root cause. But it feels bigger than just individual choices too, doesn't it? There's a systemic element.
Hugely important point. We need advocacy. Policies that support sustainable farming, make whole foods more affordable and accessible, especially in food deserts.
Clearer labeling too, so people actually know what's group 4.
Definitely. Clearer labeling, maybe restrictions on marketing UPFs to kids, more public health education, and tackling the economic side, the subsidies that make processed ingredients cheap, the social justice aspect of unequal access. It's a societal challenge with huge implications for healthcare costs and health equity.
Okay, so wrapping this all up,
Yeah.
the key takeaway seems to be that UPFs are basically engineered products designed to be hyperpalatable, drive overconsumption.
Leading to metabolic chaos, chronic disease, inflammation, partly by messing with our enzymes and damaging our gut.
And all of this just chips away at our metabolic sovereignty, our control over our own health.
Precisely. But reclaiming that control is possible. It starts with conscious choices, prioritizing real whole foods, nurturing your gut health.
And maybe even pushing for those bigger systemic changes.
So for you listening, maybe just a final thought to chew on. Take a moment, think about your own plate. How much of your daily food falls into that ultra-processed category? What's maybe one small, doable change you could make this week? Could you swap out one UPF item, read one more label, cook one more meal from scratch? Just starting that shift towards more whole foods is the beginning of taking back your metabolic sovereignty. It's a journey for sure, but every step counts.